Have you ever stopped to think about what really separates a local shopkeeper from a world leader? You might think it's about politics or charisma, maybe even military power. But what if I told you the single most important language they both have to master is exactly the same? That's the language of economics. And trust me, understanding it, that's the real key.
I know, it sounds like the beginning of a bad joke, right? What on earth could a small business selling bread possibly have in common with someone running an entire country? Well, the answer is actually way more profound than you might think.
That's right. At the end of the day, it's the same game. Whether you're managing supplies of flour and sugar or you're managing national budgets and global trade deals, you're playing by the same set of rules. It's a game of trying to meet infinite wants and needs with very, very limited resources.
And that, right there, is what economics is all about. At its core, it's the science of choice. It's about how we decide what to make, how we're going to make it, and who gets the final product. These are the invisible rules that shape everything from your own personal budget all the way up to global trade. Okay, so let's jump ahead. Imagine you've made it. You're that leader now. Suddenly, the game levels up big time. And the stakes, they're not just a little higher. Your success or your failure now impacts millions and millions of lives. This dashboard here, this isn't some textbook example. This is the kind of reality a leader wakes up to every single morning. Is your economy actually growing, or is it grinding to a halt? Is the cost of living just going through the roof for your citizens? Do you have enough foreign cash to pay for the essentials you need to import? And maybe most importantly, are your young people able to find work? Answering these questions isn't optional. It is the job.
It's a lot, right? It looks pretty overwhelming. You don't just roll out of bed one day knowing how to steer a multi-trillion-dollar economy. So where does the training for something like this even begin? Well, the answer might surprise you. It starts much, much smaller.
See, before you can ever hope to understand the nation, you have to understand the neighborhood. This is where the real lessons are learned. This is where those huge abstract principles of economics actually come to life. And this is the very first piece of the puzzle, microeconomics. You can think of it as economics under a microscope. It's all about the human scale. It's about how you decide what to buy, how that local bakery decides on its prices, or how a small business decides it's time to hire its very first employee. It's all about individual decisions.
And this isn't just some nice idea. In a pretty detailed roadmap for future leaders, one of the very first big assignments in economics is to literally go out and produce a detailed report on your own local market. To truly understand the challenges of that local bakery is to understand the first rung on the ladder of statecraft.
So why start there? Because that local market is like a perfect little miniature of the entire national economy. It creates what economists call a circular flow. Think about it. Households provide work for businesses, those businesses pay income to the households, and then the households use that money to buy things from the businesses. It's this beautiful, self-sustaining engine that provides jobs, keeps money in the community, and shows you exactly how supply and demand work in the real world.
Okay, so once you get the dynamics of that single market, you can start to see how millions of them all combine and interact to form the huge, complex machine of a national economy. So how does that scale-up actually happen?
Well, it's a pretty logical journey when you lay it all out. It starts simple, with those direct local exchanges. Then, some of those businesses get successful, they grow, and they start serving a bigger area. Eventually, a few become massive national companies that can produce things way cheaper because of economies of scale. And then, the final step. These big national economies start trading with each other. And boom, you have the global system we see today.
And this is where our second big tool comes into play, macroeconomics. So if microeconomics was the microscope for looking at all the tiny details, well, macro is the telescope. It's how we study the entire system at once, all those big picture numbers like GDP, inflation, and unemployment that were on that leader's dashboard we saw earlier.
So, a great leader understands both the micro and the macro. But here's the thing. They don't just sit back and watch. Nope. They act. They have a toolkit full of powerful levers they can pull to try and steer the economy where they want it to go. And there are two main levers in that toolkit. First, you've got fiscal policy. That's the government's playground. Their tools are taxes and government spending, and they use them to influence demand and pay for public services. Then there's monetary policy. That's handled by an independent central bank. Their tools are interest rates and the money supply, and their whole game is about keeping inflation under control and the currency stable. A truly great leader knows exactly which lever to pull, and just as importantly, how hard.
And you see just how critical these tools are when a real crisis hits.
This quote from a leader's Crisis Playbook, it shows you everything. In those first 24 hours, the goal isn't some complex long-term reform. It's triage. You use every tool you have to contain the damage, reassure the public, and just stabilize the system. That's where theory gets a brutal dose of reality.
Look, mastering this stuff does not happen by accident. It is a deliberate, grueling process. The roadmap for a statesperson dedicates years to this stuff. You start with the basics, tracking real data. Then you move on to simulations, literally wargaming your response to something like crazy high inflation or a currency collapse. And finally, you practice the high-stakes world of negotiating with global players like the IMF.
Because after you've hopefully mastered your own economy, you have to navigate the global arena. This is it. This is the final level of the game, where entire nations have to interact, compete, and cooperate with each other.
And out on the world stage, a whole new set of principles comes into play. Leaders use something called comparative advantage to figure out what their country should be really good at producing. They obsess over the balance of payments, making sure they're exporting enough to pay for all the stuff they need to import. They watch exchange rates like a hawk, because a sudden drop can absolutely cripple an economy. And all of this leads to negotiating these massive trade agreements that basically set the rules for the whole world.
And this brings us right back to where we started, that full circle moment. The same basic logic you use to understand why a local bakery gets its flour from one specific farm, that same logic gets scaled all the way up to negotiating a billion-dollar trade deal. The game is bigger, the pieces are way more complex, but the fundamental rules of scarcity, choice, and supply and demand, they never, ever change.
So when you boil it all down, economics isn't just about charts and numbers. It's the operating system of power. Understanding it gives you the ability to actually shape society. Which leaves us with one final and I think pretty crucial question. If this knowledge is so powerful, shouldn't everyone have a seat at the table? Who gets to learn this language, and who gets to decide how it's spoken?